When a chemical plant moved into Carl Booth's Columbus, Ohio neighborhood,
as time went on and they moved and they built that plant over there,
few considered that gases that spewed from nearby silos would end up in their lungs.
breathing and just dizziness, asthma type situation, coughing, cold-like symptoms.
And even fewer understood just how serious those toxins were. Chemicals like formaldehyde, which is used in embalming.
They didn't know until an explosion.
But often pollution, like in the southeast neighborhood, has to reach disastrous proportion for anyone to take notice, as it did in 1984, or again.
We had an explosion. This one killed. We had a young man to get killed away. He got blowed up. It caused death. And not only sprayed paint, residue, and formaldehyde, but it also shook the foundation and caused structure damage to some of the buildings.
What's the real problem?
David Altman, an environmental lawyer based in Cincinnati, says that it doesn't have to come to something like what Booth and his neighbors experienced in order to enforce laws made to protect people and the environment.
You don't have to have bodies you're zipping into a bag that were killed in order to use these laws. You want to use the laws ideally before there's any harm whatsoever to prevent harm. In other words, they're preventative.
In fact, Altman and the attorneys he has worked with helped pioneer a concept designed to help everyday people like Carl Booth and his wife Roberta before catastrophe like an explosion.
They had about 19 explosions over there that we didn't know anything about.
Altman, whose firm only represents plaintiffs in environmental cases, taught people to use a tool called a citizen suit when he first broke into the arena in the early 80s, a time not too long ago when environmental laws were in their infancy.
These are provisions that are in every single federal environmental law, and they allow the citizens to take the law into their own hands after giving notice and enforce the law before they're damaged.
But when prevention fails, Altman and company have been there for hundreds, taking on airports, nuclear power plants, and commanding cleanups of land, air, and water, pinning David against Goliath after Goliath. Marilyn Wall is on the national board of the Sierra Club, an environmental preservation group. About the nature of the cases Altman and colleagues have taken on.
I don't know if any of them are easy or really a slam dunk. It's a very challenging field to be in, and it takes a lot of expertise, which Dave certainly has over the years of working on just about every toxic I've heard of and different types of facilities.
Such was the case in Yellow Springs, Ohio. The groundwater had been contaminated by a rubber company that was dear to the hearts of locals.
Really brilliant reputation in town.
Cindy Green, her husband and young brood,
A 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 13-year-old son.
Carefully selected a home not far from the location of the plant, where her young family would grow.
About 4 apple trees and a fence, and he was dividing off his property. So we have an organic farm in back of our house, and it's a real quiet neighborhood. It's on a circle, so the kids play in the street, and it's close to the school, so I thought we had found the best lot in Yellow Springs. We built the house with a company that did sweat equity, so we actually would come out to our house every night and clean up the lot, and I took care of getting all the permits myself. We painted the house ourselves, so it took about 1.5 years to build the house.
But within about a year, she received a disturbing letter from the company.
It was specifically said in the letter that the meeting was not a public meeting. So I attended the meeting. They said they had some news about some pollution or that was leaking off of their property.
The company was blowing the whistle on itself, sort of.
So I was totally disillusioned because I was getting statements from people that I thought I respected, that I thought I trusted, that it's no big deal. They polluted prior to the laws changing. They didn't know what they did. It's not their fault.
They seemed to vow to clean up the toxic matter, but Cindy and a neighbor began to do the math.
And we sat there writing down the numbers and moving the digits over. And then we could compare that to the maximum contaminant level that was allowed, and saw that what they were telling us, even at this meeting, it became very clear right up front that they were not really trying to be transparent with us, that they were trying to trick us.
A cover-up strategy that is not uncommon.
The actual fox talking about why the chicken house is safe. And that's what if you don't have your own experts, that's the position you're in.
As it had in southeast Columbus, the chemicals released by the company could cause or aggravate diseases that were discovered in nearby neighborhoods.
We have an increase of cancer. We have a lot of asthma in children. And I probably know 4 or 5 kids that have died under the age of 20 here in town from health-related issues.
We've lost a lot of people. We've lost a lot of people out here through cancer and emphysema. I had never been sick a day in my life. In fact, I wasn't even taking aspirin. I became sick a couple of times and had to go to St. Anthony Hospital. They never did find out what was wrong.
Carl's wife, Roberta, who took a leadership role in the fight against the polluter, was like Carl, a lifelong non-smoker. But disease set in.
She had cancer in the lungs, and she had breast cancer, and it spread in the whole body. She was a fighter.
But Roberta wasn't the only one. Carl points out at least 3 immediate neighbors who died from similar types of cancer.
Very, very painful battle, yeah.
Altman says that his ethos was not necessarily developed in law school, taking cues from early days in academia. First as a journalist and editor of his college newspaper, and then in grad school, when he began to develop as somewhat of a community organizer.
I set up a volunteer organization that did things like dealt with hardcore heroin addiction and also environmental issues. But there were hundreds and ultimately thousands of volunteers that helped us have success.
In fact, national leaders like Senator Bill Brock, Ohio Governor John Gilligan, and the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare were among those who took notice of Altman's ability to mobilize students. Even the first President Bush, then a little-known congressman from Texas, sent his congratulations and interest.
And that's part of where Dave has focused a lot of his time and attention, is where most of these where people really need the help, where communities are adversely affected and have limited resources, typically lower income or less education.
Though most easily compared to Hollywood's interpretation.
The easy way to explain this job is tell them to go see the movie Aaron Brockovich, and then they all around the world, people understand what our kind of work is from that movie.
Altman likes to allude to another movie to describe the scope of pollution and who it has affected.
As they said at the time, a nightmare on Elm Street. It was a nightmare on every street.
Settlements do involve figures with dollar signs, but they lack the glitz of Tinseltown. Their primary aim, to ensure the oversight is established.
Your rights are not up to some, I like to say, kid with a master's degree up in Chicago and the vice president of public relations of the polluting company.
Cindy says that fixing the contamination, thanks to a settlement, has been worth it.
The pollution we knew was underneath our house, and as bad as it was for me and my kids and my husband, I knew I could not put another family through that. So when we decided to go ahead with the lawsuit, we had pretty much decided it's time for us to take responsibility and clean up what we can and take care of the mess.
Now in his 60s, this environmental warrior keeps pushing to protect the people and the environment by only taking cases with an almost insurmountable element.
That's the idea of how the law works, and that's the gratifying thing about passing a law, maybe representing the little guy and then having the big guys come in and also use it to clean up the environment. The goal of all these things is to be sure the environment and human is cleaned up and human health is protected. Now, maybe it's foolish to take on nothing but tough cases that are kind of large, but that's what we do.
Produced by DigiRevolution.